Hi, I'm Tim Spannus. I'm a deacon, actually archdeacon in the Diocese of Michigan. But long before I was a deacon, I was an usher. And I want to talk a little bit about the importance of ushers to the congregation, to visitors, and in our ministry of hospitality. As a worship leader, I depend on ushers as we go through the service. Ushers bring people up to the altar for communion. Ushers bring people into the service. Ushers deal with any problems as they occur. If you have somebody who's confused or needs assistance during the service, that's the role of an usher. And it makes the whole service flow more smoothly. And as a worship leader, we really appreciate the work that ushers do. I refer to the work of ushers as a ministry of hospitality, because for visitors walking into the congregation, the usher is likely the first person they talk to. And the ushers should make it clear that those who walk in are welcome and welcome them, make sure they know where to go, how to get into the building, how to be seated, what worship materials they need. All of that is our ministry of welcome. It's more than just saying, we're glad you're here. It's doing things to make the visitor feel welcome. And throughout this, I'm going to talk about the importance of visitors. The people who are in your pews every Sunday probably don't depend on the ushers as much, but those who have never been in your building before, never been in your worship service before, really depend on the ushers. And you want those people to come back, even if they don't come back again till the next time they're on vacation near your parish. But we want them to come back and feel welcome to be there. And that's an important part of your role as an usher. Ushers also have a role in terms of security, of making sure that people in the building in the worship service are safe. I don't think it's as important as our role in hospitality, but it's absolutely an essential role, and it's one that ushers really need to pay attention to. And of course, ushers provide assistance as needed. Now we can go back into scripture and look for examples of ushers, but of course you probably know that the word usher never shows up in scripture. But there are people who serve that role. You may be familiar with Psalm 84 in part, which reads, "I would rather be a doorkeeper in the house of my God than to dwell in the courts of wickedness." Well, those doorkeepers were Levites from the tribe of Levi, sons of Korah, who was Moses's cousin. And they were porters in the temple, and they served the functions that we now call ushers. So there is that reference to it. And also look at what the disciples did. In the feedings of 4,000 or 5,000, the ushers distributed food, asked people to sit down, and then after the meal collected the leftovers and found, of course, dozens of baskets of food. And those all sound to me like roles of ushers. The disciples also guided people to Jesus. Some people would come up to Jesus and say, "Let me speak to Jesus." And the usher, the disciple, would bring the person to Jesus. So there is that role, which they weren't called ushers, but we really recognize it when we look at it that way. In the early church, that we're talking now before the Reformation, those who were not yet baptized were excused from the service after the service of the word before the Eucharist, before the Holy Communion. And it was the job of ushers to take them out where they would go for instruction before they were baptized. These ushers, in that case, were sometimes called subdeacons or other minor orders, but they then kept the doors closed during the Holy Eucharist. So those who were not yet baptized, not yet admitted into the holy mysteries, were kept out. That's not a ministry that we do now, but we do see that role as doorkeeper in the early church. After the Reformation, and in the early church in America, you may have heard of ushers who had the role of keeping people awake. So if somebody dozed off during the sermon or wasn't singing lustily during a hymn, the usher might tap them on the shoulder and try to keep them awake, keep them participating in the service. So we have that background of the ushers. In the next segment, we'll talk about the role of hospitality.